Hello, everybody. This is episode 2 of our series that we have on a history series entitled Trouble in Ireland, Partition and Its Consequences. This is the episode 2 that we're dealing with. This is called United in Disunity. The picture at the back there, that shows a street scene in 1950s, I think, in Northern Ireland, where in Belfast, I believe, where some children are playing football. Okay, so this is a map here of the partition in Ireland. Now, the two states which had grown up from the partition were very much in their infancy in the 1930s. And this map here was made in 1930, in fact. And what's really interesting about it is that if you follow the dotted line is actually the border, the existing border of Northern Ireland, where you have the 6 counties that were partitioned off to form Northern Ireland, and the rest of the map here is what was originally the Irish Free State and was later to become the Irish Republic. You can see that the dotted line is much less pronounced than the actual. Now, this is the Ulster, which you often hear Ulster and Northern Ireland mixed up together as though they mean the same thing. They don't actually mean the same thing. The thick border shown, that's the continuous line rather than the dotted line, that is the actual provincial boundary of Ulster. So as you can see, there are 3 counties of Ulster within the Irish Free State or the Republic. And this is a bit strange, but as we've been talking about in the previous episode, the whole partition is very strange. But what's interesting about this map, even though it was made in Northern Ireland, it was obviously made in Northern Ireland because they talk about Londonderry and not Derry. So it's obviously a map made in Northern Ireland. But what you might find strange about this is that they have made the actual provincial boundary, they've made that much more prominent than the actual political boundary, which is in the dotted lines. So it's interesting because it meant that at this time there were still quite strong elements within Northern Ireland who believed that the border would be resolved fairly soon, and it was only a temporary measure, this partitioning of the 6 counties, that's Derry, Antrim Down, Tyrone, Armagh and Fermanagh. And so that's what's interesting about it, this map in particular. Okay, right. So what about these 2 states then? So we have two states in Ireland now, where there only used to be one before. It was one under British occupation, but it was still considered to be one area of the one country, basically, that was part of the United Kingdom, and is now the Northern Ireland, or Ulster as it became known as. This was this continued to be under British rule officially, but unofficially it was actually under under a local government. This was a government of unionists. The unionists had complete control over it, and it was set up in the 6 counties, and it was a sort of locally devolved government, which was quite unique in the British state at that time. And the British basically just, once they'd allowed the local devolved government was basically allowed to get on with whatever it wanted to do. They took no exception at the sectarian practices that were going on. The other part of the country is the Irish Free State, and then later becomes the Irish Republic. Now, I've put down some bullet points here. I'll put a mirror in the middle because I believe that they do actually reflect each other in many different ways. And I've put up the title at the top there, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. That's the fairy tale quote, of course. And I've paraphrased it to turn into who's the most reactionary of them all. And both states have, they certainly have some quite strong differences, but they also have quite strong similarities. For instance, if we have a look at the Northern Ireland, which is, I put in orange on the left there, you can see that you have basically you have a police state that has special powers of mass detention and arbitrary arrest, and it's very reliant on a police force supported by a paramilitary police force that's made almost 100% of Protestants. The main police force itself is at least 90% Protestant, which it conflicts with the actual proportions of the population at the time were roughly about 60 to 65% Protestant and 30 to 35% Catholic within Northern Ireland. So you have also in Northern Ireland or Ulster, you have a settler-colonial discrimination going on and a renewed Protestant ascendancy. The Protestant ascendancy, of course, had applied across Ireland from the outset of the British occupation, but it was no longer applied within the Free State stroke Republic, but there was a renewed Protestant ascendancy, and one that also included, instead of just Protestants, meaning Anglican Protestants, it also included non-dissenter Protestants, which is quite a change from what it had been before, because the dissenters were actually discriminated against right up until the early 19th century within the British rule of Ireland. There was the dual apartheid of all social space, so Protestant and Catholic exclusivity, mutual exclusivity. So the Protestants would generally not socialize in the same places that the Catholics would, and vice versa. There was an industrialized economy, which that contrasts with the Republic. But it's very concentrated in the Lagan Valley. It doesn't really apply outside the Lagan Valley. The Lagan Valley is the big artery, if you like, of of Northern Ireland, which includes the city of Belfast and various other auxiliary towns to it, where there were mills and there were shipyards and there's a linen industry, there's a tobacco industry, and various other and aircraft industry is starting up. And this is but it's still very dependent, and the rest of the country, the rest of Northern Ireland, is still very agricultural. It's not that different. The standard of living may be slightly higher, but in general, it's still very similar to what's going on in the Free State. So the Northern Ireland's run by a Protestant aristocracy and bourgeoisie. It's very closely tied to Britain's Tory party. There are 19th century poor laws which are still being enforced. In Britain, mainland Britain, they get rid of the poor laws are terminated in, I think it's 1928. In the Republic, it gets the continued poor laws from the British occupation time. They get rid of even earlier, so they get rid of them around about 1924, and these are the ones that include things like workhouses and things which are very humiliating for unemployed people. And it's inward-looking and closed-minded, as we can see that also applies in the Free State. It's highly repressive of sexuality, women, and free expression. Well, that's exactly the same as in the Free State. And no toleration of dissent. Well, that's exactly the same as in the Free State. And all dissidents and marginalized Catholics, because the Catholic community is largely, unless it's actually servicing its own community, Catholics find it very difficult to get jobs at all. And if they do manage to get jobs, it's temporary work, usually at the bottom of the scale. So a lot of Catholics are forced to emigrate. In the Irish Free State, later the Republic, we have a Catholic clerical state dominating education and social services. This develops over the period. It starts when the Free State is set up, but a lot of it is basically a continuation of what had been before. So just they fly a green flag instead of a Union Jack over it, but it's pretty much the same. But the Catholic Church is now free to start to implement this very devotional form of Catholicism across the education system and the social services. So, for instance, nuns are dominating the hospitals and things like this here. This all takes shape over the period of the Free State, but it's only when De Valera takes power and turns it into republic that it really starts to sink in. So there's a struggle going on inside the Free State, and the Catholic clerical nature of it only becomes entrenched in the 1940s and 50s. There's stifling levels of censorship are set up. This is around the same time as this, and it becomes virtually impossible for free thinking and experimental fictions to be written now, or experimental poetry, you know, things that are talking about sexuality, anything like this. It becomes more and more difficult to get these published, and often they aren't even talked about outside a few very small artistic circles. Yet it's happy to accommodate the remnant of the Protestant ascendancy. Now there are a few Protestants still left in the Free State or the Republic, and a few of them still remain today, of course. But the remnant Protestant ascendancy, they're still able to carry on, some of them as landlords, and they're all in the countryside wielding great power there, and also they also dominate especially the Trinity College in Dublin, which doesn't become doesn't get free of the Protestant ascendancy until quite late on, maybe the 1960s, 70s. It starts to allow Catholics into it, which is quite incredible. And this is all like allowed to continue under the Free State and the early Republic. So there's on-off emergency state powers. So these state powers are not quite as severe as the ones in Northern Ireland, the Special Powers Act, but they are able to be brought into effect as required, and so there's a similarity there too. You've got a dependent agricultural economy. Now, it's similar again to the rural parts of Northern Ireland, because that was also a dependent rural agricultural economy, where all the produce is going across to Britain. So you still have this continuing. So all the exports are basically going across to Britain, the cattle and the fodder and the turf and the all these corn, you know, all these sorts of things, oats. These are being exported to Britain. And but the Republic remains largely unindustrialized. Even Dublin, the capital city, is geared towards being an export town rather than a city in its own right. The Free State / Republic is run by corporatist ranch farmers, clerics, and their allied professionals like teachers, lawyers, and so on and so forth. This starts to take shape, as I was saying earlier, between the 1930s and 50s approximately. There's dire poverty in the cities and the countryside, is very evident, and especially in certain parts of the countryside and certain parts of the cities, it's quite bad. It's probably worse than even Northern Ireland. Inward looking and close-minded, we've already mentioned that in relation to Northern Ireland. Highly repressive of sexuality, women, free expression, yes, that's very similar, and no toleration of dissent. Once again, so once again, at the end here, we've got all who don't fit in or who can't afford to live in poverty, they're forced to emigrate. So very similar, and in fact, a lot of you could, in the early periods, right up until probably about 1960s, it looks like there isn't any difference at all to on an economic level and on a social level to what had been there before. So there we go. We'll move on now. Okay, so here we have a couple of pictures of what life was like in the west of Ireland. Now, the picture up in the top left, that is actually from the 1890s. So, and the picture on the right, the bottom right, this is from the 1930s. Now, is there much difference between the two? There is the same sort of squalor and abject poverty. People with bare feet, they can be seen in both pictures. So a lot of things just haven't changed at all. The only thing is that there's now laws in the Republic to protect the Irish language, but it's not protecting this guy's feet from getting blisters on the road, is it? So you can see that there's a lot of continuation. And here is Dublin. Here's a Dublin street or cul-de-sac. And you can see that at one time these houses would have been very, very salubrious, and they would have housed the Anglo-Irish gentry. But within in the late 19th century, these were being sold off, and they were taken over by landlords, and and this was squalor. So you would be seeing within each of these buildings would be divided up into as many flats as they could get in there, and each flat would contain at least one family, and probably quite a large family. So you can see the sort of squalor that that people were living in, and there's only one car in the whole street. And of course, come the Great Depression in the late 1920s, there's unemployment. So this is a picture from the time. I think it's from Ireland, but I'm not entirely sure. It came up when I was searching for Ireland in the Great Depression. So and again, it's uncertain whether this is Northern Ireland or the Republic. But there is widespread unemployment again in both parts of Ireland, and people are forced to emigrate. Okay, so while we're on the subject of the Great Depression, we're going to talk a little bit now about the outdoor relief riots. Now, the outdoor relief was a continuation of the poor law. The outdoor relief riots occurred in 1934, I think. And and here you can see the children are getting their milk or whatever out of the pails in front of the rather severe looking woman, who's handing them out. This is for the children of the unemployed. Now, the unemployed were forced, if they couldn't get work under the poor law, they were forced to take part in public works. So they had to go out in work parties for free and work on the roads or whatever they were doing. And there would be a foreman and so on and so forth. He'd probably get paid, but the rest of them, they wouldn't get a penny. All they would get is a handout of food at the end of it. So this was very much resented, and also the workhouses. Nobody wanted to go into the workhouses, so a lot of people chose the outdoor relief because at least you were able to stay at home with your family. You see, if you went into a workhouse, you were separated by your gender, and children were taken away from their parents. It was very traumatic. So most people, if they were unemployed, they begrudgingly decided to do the outdoor relief, because the outdoor relief, as I was explaining, it allows you like basic essentials, but in terms of food and stuff, but you got to work for free. So imagine if they preferred that to the workhouse, imagine what living in the workhouse was like. So this becomes a big issue in Northern Ireland, and what makes it gather momentum is that for the first time since the state has been set up, there are lots of Protestant unemployed people. And these are skilled workers. These are people who've been working in the shipyards. Now, this shipyards, we are told, is a sort of labor aristocracy or whatever, despite the fact that a lot of Protestant workers were actually unskilled or semi-skilled as well, but and just as prone to being made unemployed as Catholic workers. But for the first time, the so-called labor aristocracy is upset because the vast majority of people who are being laid off are from these skilled jobs, who are overwhelmingly, if not entirely, Protestant. So they start to get organized, and it's a group of communists who've come. The Soviet Union, of course, has set up the Comintern, and the Comintern is the international communist movement directed from Moscow, and there are a group of activists from Ireland who make contact with the Comintern, and they say, well, you know, we're working class people in Ireland, in both parts of Ireland, and we're getting a raw deal here, and we'd like to become communists. And at this point, they're allowed to do pretty much what they want to do. So they don't have Moscow breathing down their necks. This wasn't the case in other parts, of course, but in Ireland, because it's a new communist party, and Moscow finds it quite difficult to give orders to Irish communists, because Irish communists basically decide to do what they want to do. And this is what happens in Belfast, and a group of people including particularly there was a leader of it named Tommy Guillen. He was actually originally an IRA operative in the 1920s, and it's amazingly around him assembles this whole mass movement. I mean, you can see this how mass this movement was, which was and they issue 6 demands which they want reached, and to stop the appeal that or to stop the poor laws and to get rid of outdoor relief and to actually turn it into a proper unemployment benefit. So this is a big mass movement of both Catholic and Protestant workers, especially unemployed workers, but also other lowly paid jobs join in, and they unite, and they don't give a damn that the leader of the movement, and Belfast, a very small city in terms of everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and they all knew right well, you know, the Protestant workers would have known right well that Tommy Guillen was a former IRA operative, and in fact he was a supporter of the United Ireland, but they didn't care about that. They trusted him, and this movement swelled quite hugely, and then they started organizing these huge demonstrations, and the state decided the only way to get rid of this is to use force. So the people resisted. This shows a street in Belfast in the period, and you can see people on the streets there, and they've dug trenches on the road. These is just to stop armored cars, because the police force in Northern Ireland was both armed, and it had so they had rifles and even machine guns on the armored cars. Quite unusual for Britain at the time, but of course it was a colonial outpost, wasn't it? So and of course those stones there have been dug out from the cobbles, and they can be used as ammunition against the armored cars as well, or against the police on foot. So this kicks off on the Falls Road, and because what the state is trying to do is trying desperately, because they know Catholic and Protestant workers have come together, so they decide what we've got to do is we've got to divide them again. So we've got to divide the Protestant and the Catholic workers. So we'll just attack the Catholic workers. So they go steaming into the Falls Road in their Land Rovers and what have you, and their armored cars, and armed police start shooting at people. There's a man killed, and according to the story, and this was taken down by a Dublin journalist, he was actually on the Shankill Road while this was kicking off on the Falls Road. The Shankill Road is a Protestant road right next to the Catholic Falls Road, and the story goes that a woman in a shawl ran from the Falls community across to the the Shankill community, or who knows, she might have been from the Shankill herself, but she'd taken herself down to the falls to take a look at what was going on. And she came back and she said, "Are you going to let your brothers and sisters down?" And there was immediate this woman in a shawl was able to motivate people, and they'd all kicked off on the Shankill Road as well. And suddenly the Royal Ulster Constabulary were finding that they were having to deal with a battle in two fronts. They were having to deal with fighting the Protestants on the Shankill, and they were having to fight the Catholics on the Falls simultaneously. And both sides were helping each other. So IRA guys were going across. They were meeting up with former B Specials, B Specials being the paramilitary police force, but the paramilitary police force being integrated into the community was not they were armed, because they were allowed to carry rifles, but they weren't disconnected from their communities. So when their community was attacked by the regular police force, they started shooting back, and they gave some of their weapons to IRA people on the falls to shoot back at the police as well, and vice versa was going on as well. So, but there was actually very little shooting going on. It has to be said. The main struggle was being fought by ordinary people, just with sticks and stones, and running around and building barricades. So that was what was going on. And once this situation had been reached, the Northern Ireland government immediately caved in, and they gave in to I think it was 5 out of the 6 demands, and they offered. So it was a great victory, and unfortunately, the communists found it very difficult to build on this in enough, but as we'll see in a minute, they did actually manage to build something. This Tommy Guillen character was quite motivated and energized person, and he went on to try and organize much more than that. And but it was a huge success story. It didn't last, unfortunately, because the government was busy trying to stir things up, get the sectarian feeling back again, and to a certain extent they succeeded. They created a highly sectarian force known as the Ulster Protestant League, and they would attack communist meetings and attack any unity of Catholic and Protestant workers, and they were sort of led by evangelical pastors. So the communists were having to contend with this now, as well as trying to organize people to take things further from what they'd actually achieved. And unfortunately, the end result was not in the favor of unity. However, they did succeed. This is the railway dispute. The Great Northern Railway, which ran the railways not only in the Northern Ireland but also in the Republic, or should I say the Free State, the there was quite a vicious dispute, and once again, it was predominantly Protestant workers. But the predominantly Protestant workers, they got support not only from Catholic workers who were working in the docks or were carters, who refused to handle goods which were taken from the trains, which were being, there was scabs organized, and the scabs had to be protected. The scabs had to be protected by armed police and armed soldiers in the end. There was a train derailed. It was quite severe industrial dispute. And predominantly, as I say, the railway workers were overwhelmingly Protestant, but they got support from the Catholic workers who refused to handle the goods which had been taken by the scabs and export them to Britain. And not only that, but they also got support from the other side of the border, because, as I say, the Free State had its own train. So it was the same line, but it was but there were it was the same company, should I say, but there were lines within the Free State which were run by Southern workers. So and they also joined the strike, and they also because what had happened, what had triggered it, was that the railway workers had been told to take a wage cut. In the end, the railway strike was defeated, I'm afraid. The workers, they had to take a wage cut, but it wasn't as bad a wage cut as as had been initially announced by the management, but it was still bad enough. But it was really interesting because it had achieved unity on both sides of the border, a unity in struggle of workers struggling against their class opponents. And it also the IRA were taken by surprise by the outdoor relief riots. They thought it was just all what's the word, something that just was going to blow off overnight, but it wasn't. So when the railway dispute, which followed shortly after the outdoor relief riots, when that one kicked off, then the IRA were starting to get ready, and this is the left-wing elements of the IRA, because they actually had the local Belfast commanding officer of the IRA. He was sitting in his terraced house on the Falls Road one day, and he got a visit from two Protestant workers from another part of Belfast, and they knew where he was living, and they come up to his house. They'd been directed up to his house, by other people on the Falls community, presumably, and he said, "Well, what are you guys here for?" And they said, "Is there anything you guys can do?" Meaning the IRA. Is there anything you guys can do to support our strike? And he said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, you guys are good at blowing things up and this sort of stuff. So maybe you can use that in the railway dispute." And in fact, there were a few attempts to do something like this. They weren't very successful. They were rather ineffective, in fact, but they were tried. Right, these are communists from the Communist Party of Ireland had been set up, as we were talking about earlier, and of course it was part of the Comintern, and the Irish. These are a group of Irish people related. They're not all members of the Communist Party, but some are. But for instance, there's Peadar O'Donnell is in there, and Peadar O'Donnell was not he never actually joined the Communist Party, even though he was associated with them. He was also associated with the IRA very closely. He'd been a former IRA operative. He'd also taken part in the 1920s Soviets. If you look at the first part in the series, you'll find out about the 1920 Soviets, which were quite widespread throughout the early 1920s, established in the South. And Peadar O'Donnell was the first. He was responsible for setting up the first of these in 1919. And anyway, these are a group of them. They're well, maybe not Berlin, but they're in Germany in the early 1930s, and they're attending a conference of I think it's peasant communes or peasant collectives or whatever. And as you can imagine, that would be run by the Soviets. The Soviets would be giving their very, very slanted view of what collectivization, or the wonders that collectivization was achieving in the Soviet Union, which we all know was not true, but a lot of people at the time believed it because there was nothing left, because the Bolsheviks or the communists had effectively liquidated any other left-wing currents who disagreed with them. The only one left was the Soviet communists, and therefore a lot of people believed it because they didn't have any evidence at the time to tell them otherwise. But it's interesting in the Irish case that a lot that they eventually the Communist Party of Ireland was it was on the order of Stalin. He decided to get rid of the Communist Party of Ireland. That part of the reason was because of the repression that was going on in both parts of Ireland directed against communists, but it was also due to the fact that they couldn't rely on the Irish to just simply obey orders. The Irish had their own ideas, what communism might mean. So they and of course Moscow didn't like that. So in the end, the communist movement, which was being set up, and they were having to fight the fascists. There's a fascist movement set up in Ireland. We'll be dealing with that in a minute. There was also there were also like big struggles going on in in Belfast and in Dublin, and also in the rural areas where people were fighting back, and they weren't going to take any more of the nonsense which they had to put up with. These are two figures now. We've got Frank Ryan there. He's on the left, and we have Nora Connolly O'Brien. Now, she's the daughter of James Connolly, who was killed by the British, executed in the 1916 Rising for his part. He was also the leader of the Irish Citizen Army. This was his daughter. His daughter carried on a lot of his politics. She was affiliated again with the Communist Party. I don't think she actually joined the Communist Party, but there was this new movement set up in the mid-1930s. I think it was 1934. The outdoor relief strike, I think, was actually in 1932, and then the railway strike was 1933, and I think the Republican Congress is set up in 1934. Now, Republican Congress is this idea of, if we get all the left together in Ireland, then what can we do? And that includes left elements of the IRA. It includes communists. It includes even anarchists and other associated elements. It includes independent Marxists, such as the Council Communists. It includes people like that, and so Nora Connolly and Frank Ryan, they both affiliate with the communists, but they never join the communists. But there's a dispute within the Republican Congress, which eventually splits the movement, because what's happening back in Moscow is Moscow has suddenly decided that it's going to go for a united front with, as they term it, with progressive elements of the bourgeoisie. So and Frank Ryan and Nora Connolly said, no, we need to focus on a workers' republic. We've just won over large sections of Protestant workers in the north. They're not going to be happy with a class alliance. The only thing that's going to appeal to them is going to be a workers' republic. And of course, they were right, but they very narrowly lost the vote. And the class alliance idea was perpetuated, because this tied in with what Moscow wanted at the time, because this is the period of the Popular Front, the mid-1930s, when the idea of resisting fascism by any means necessary. Okay, so this is the flag of the Republican Congress. It's now been integrated into Republican imagery. It's a blue flag with the starry plough on it. The original starry plough was actually a green flag, and it actually was an image of a plough with a sword sticking out of it, as in swords into plowshares. But this one is the one that is adopted by the Republican Congress as their symbol. It's also adopted by the Irish Citizen Army. The Irish Citizen Army was the James Connolly's element that contributed to the 1916 Rising, and they played a smaller part in the the War of Independence. They were basically left in charge of logistics rather than actual combat duties. But they did take part in it, and then the Irish Citizen Army gets started up again in the 1930s, and they take on landlords and they take on factory owners, and they start to do the same sort of things that the Irish Citizen Army were doing back in the days of Larkin and Connolly. And so they take up the same flag. So this is a march that takes place. This is interesting because this is they're going to celebrate a Republican hero. The Republican hero is Wolfe Tone, who was, of course, a Dublin-based dissenter, who was martyred during the 1798 Irish United Irishmen uprising, and they all march on this. So all these guys behind the banner are probably Protestants from the Shankill Road, and their banner is "Break the connection with capitalism." So this was what they went along to the commemoration of Wolfe Tone, which is an annual event. It still takes place to this day. It's usually only attended by Republicans, like nationalist type Republicans. And suddenly there was this in 1935, I think this was, or 34, 35. This lot marched to Bodenstown, which is in the Free State stroke Republic, and to commemorate this Dublin member of the United Irishmen, and they this is the banner that they marched under, "Break the connection with capitalism." And they link up with the people in the Republican Congress, so mostly from Catholic backgrounds, and they make an appearance at the Bodenstown commemoration. And unfortunately, what happens is that the more traditional nationalist elements of the IRA decide to attack them, and they drive them off. And they well, I mean, there's a big riot basically occurs in the graveyard of Wolfe Tone, who is all about uniting Catholic, Protestant dissenter. And here's a bunch of traditional Catholic nationalist Republicans attacking basically united Catholic Protestant worker Republicans. So this is what this picture is all about. This was a picture taken at the time. And also, we've already mentioned that there were fascists in Ireland. These are the fascists here, and they were known as the Blue Shirts. Well, there are various different fascist groups, maybe 3 or 4, I think there were. But the Blue Shirts were the big one, and they are related to Cumann na nGaedheal. Cumann na nGaedheal is the old name for the Fine Gael party in Ireland in in the Republic, that is, and so the Fine Gael party is actually descended from fascists, interestingly enough, because the members of the Cumann na nGaedheal were encouraged to join the blue shirt movement. So, and these people were attacked by the nationalist IRA and the socialist communists in Ireland. They didn't like these people either. So there was quite a bit of street battles going on between the fascists and the IRA and its socialist allies in the south. And of course, with the Republican Congress virtually much dies after the vote has been taken to support the Popular Front concept decided by Moscow rather than the Workers' Republic. And this is a terrible disaster for the left. So a lot of the left people they hear about that Spain's kicking off, and they decide to go to Spain to defend the Republic or to get involved in the revolution, because there's actually a revolution going on, as well as a reactionary attack against the Republic. And a lot of them end up joining the international column. So this is the start of that taking place. And as you can see, people who are Republicans, Irish Republicans, as the placard there says, greet Spanish republicanism, the Spanish Republicans. And this is the Connolly column, I think, the start, or the Irish section that developed into the Connolly column at the Battle of Jarama, which was just outside Madrid. And this is like a moment when the Irish section of the international brigade, they actually formed their own unit, and it was called the Connolly Column. Not all Irish people joined it, and of course, as you can see, not all of them are Irish from Ireland. Some of them are Canadians, and there's somebody else from Liverpool, and you've got two people from Liverpool, and you've got somebody from the US in this, and some Irish actually joined the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and some of them joined the Canadian Brigade, and some of them joined with British socialists as well. So there's quite a mix, but the Connolly column is set up to represent the Irish in Spain who are fighting for the Republic. The blue shirts also go to Spain on much larger numbers. You would think, well, then they would play a decisive role, but in fact, Franco didn't want them there, and so I think they fought in one battle, and then they were sent to the rear pretty much, and they were expected to bury bodies, and they didn't like that very much. So most of them drifted back, very disillusioned, back to Ireland. But a lot of the veterans of the International Brigade, Irish veterans, they're still being commemorated to this day. So there you get a glimpse of them there. There were also Irish who also drifted into other elements of not just the communist organized international brigades. One guy in particular, Captain James White. He went and joined the anarchists, and there would have been other ones who would have joined the POUM in Barcelona, who were independent Marxists. So all sorts of different things going on. Right. So we're now moving on to the Second World War. This is the Second World War. The Spanish Civil War is sort of like a prelude to the Second World War. And a lot of people don't realize, but Guinness was getting ready for the triumph of the Reich, and was getting ready to market their famous stout, the famous Irish stout, to for the use of Hitler's troops. So I mean, this because Guinness, contrary to its the image it likes to present of itself, is the owners have always had very right-wing politics, and so if the Germans had invaded Ireland, then you would have had you would have had adverts like this being set up all over Ireland, because they had them all ready. They had them all ready to be used, and you can see the one in the middle is particularly horrifying. It has or it's sort of funny in a sort of strange way. I mean, this is sort of the Irish slave worker is fortified by Guinness to work on the German soldiers' half track. Say no more, really. Okay, so the second, so Ireland is the Irish Republic, because it's soon going to be known as. It stays neutral during the Second World War, and but the North, of course, remains part of Britain officially. So therefore, it's a target for the Third Reich. So during the Blitz, the Nazis send over waves of bombers to Belfast, and the first raid is rather inconsequential. The second raid is devastating. This was the second raid. They dropped high explosive all over the centre of Belfast. They missed the shipyards, but they got the ordinary people instead. And there were somewhere in the region, for one night's bombing, there was something in the region of 1,000 people killed. We don't know exactly, because a lot of people just disappeared. They were blown to smithereens or whatever. A whole street was annihilated. Everybody who lived in the street was killed. There was insufficient protection. The Republic, sorry, not the Republic. The anti-aircraft defences of Belfast were insufficient. The local government, the Stormont government, hadn't invested in it, nor had Westminster. So, and they hadn't invested in air raid shelters either. So this accounted for the high casualty rate. There was a third raid. This was an incendiary raid, It also missed the main targets, but it also caused devastation. Not quite as bad as the first time or this one, but you can see at the back there. There's that's what's known as the Albert clock, which is a landmark in Belfast. It's still standing to this day, as far as I'm aware. But as you can see, a lot of the buildings round about were not standing anymore. They were taken down by the bombing. And this is more of the bombing showing. We also should note that the Republic, or what was soon to be the Republic, the De Valera government of Ireland, they sent, because there was a shortage, as well as a shortage of everything else. There was also a shortage of fire engines. So the De Valera ordered that the fire engines be sent across the border to help out, and they were warmly received when they arrived. We think in revenge, we're not entirely sure, but the Germans definitely saw that that sending over fire engines and ambulances and things like this here, that was considered to be you were no longer neutral if you did that. So the Germans actually bombed Dublin, and there was some devastation in a part of Dublin, part of North Dublin. They seem to have concentrated on the poorest parts of both cities. And so you would have seen like this in Dublin as well. It wasn't quite as bad as the bombing of Belfast by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a sort of like a finger in the eye from Hitler to De Valera to and of course it backfired. As we all know, a lot of Irish soldiers actually joined up to fight for the British Army in the Second World War. The First World War, a lot of them did also joined up, but the First World War was more to do with unemployment. The Second World War was to resist fascism. I think a lot of people were inspired by that in both parts of Ireland. Right. Okay, we move on to culture and stuff now. And this is what's known as a crossroads dance. Now, crossroads dancing was very popular in Ireland right up until the 1940s. And it was suppressed by the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church didn't like this. They didn't like people holding each other, and especially if they were of opposite genders, and with a bit of darkness about to descend, and you know, people getting a bit leery with alcohol and things like this here, and it getting dark, and you know, and people might disappear off and might do things which Catholic Church wouldn't approve of. So there was a whole lot of legislation brought out at the end of the and supported by the Gaelic League. Now, you would think that the Gaelic League would be in support of Irish culture. It's supposed to be, after all, but not in the case of. What they wanted was a sanitized version of Irish culture without any any connotations of poverty or struggle or well, you know, a sort of noble poverty, but not a struggling sort of poverty, which was the real poverty, and they wanted people to you know, and any mention of sex or of any sort of deviant behavior had to be edited out of the picture as much as possible. So there were a lot of laws brought in to stop the crossroads dancing, and in fact there was a related feature known as kitchen dancing. Kitchen dancing was very popular in Ireland right through the British occupation and all the rest of it. Kitchen dancing and crossroads dancing was what kept Irish culture going, and and the first acts of the supposedly independent Ireland Irish government is to suppress these activities, suppress these cultural activities. It's quite incredible, but this is what was going on, and they wanted everybody to dance in what's become the traditional, what is traditional in scare quotes Irish dancing that was allowed to survive, which is the one where everybody dances separately from the others, and the set dancing, basically, where you have your hands, you're not allowed to raise your hands, you're not allowed to touch anybody, your hands are rigid at your side, and you do it all with the footwork. And this was a complete travesty in terms of, if you look at the old pictures, the old prints back from the 18th to 19th century, you'll see Irish people throwing their arms up into the air, and they're linking their arms with other people, maybe including women and stuff, and it's quite interactive. And that is all eliminated by this new puritanical approach to Irish culture. Right, and believe it or not, jazz was very popular in Ireland. We don't normally think of it being so, but it was very popular. But it was again persecuted because it was quite racist stuff going on in the papers. The independent Irish papers were in the late 1920s onwards were geared up to prevent the sort of jazz dancing and the mingling of sexes again. That was not to be allowed, and especially with this expressive dance going on. So everything had to be controlled by the church, and you know, everybody had to do it. If they were going to make any dancing, there had to be priests present and all the rest of it. And this was not what people wanted, because there was because there were jazz clubs in Dublin and Cork and places, and they were all always being suppressed, and that happened, especially they actually brought out anti-jazz laws. Can you believe this? Yes, they brought out anti-jazz laws to prevent to close down as many of the jazz clubs as possible. So anything interesting in Ireland in this period, it gets once the counter-revolution starts in the sort of late 1930s, the first things that they do is to try and stamp out all these things like the crossroads dancing. That's already gone by the 1940s, and the jazz scenes have disappeared by the 1940s. The only place it keeps on going is actually Belfast in the north, to a lesser degree. Well, the jazz club, not the kitchen or crossroads dancing. So, and similarly, literature is being suppressed. So there was quite a lot of people in this period, especially from the 1930s on. But, you know, I mean, James Joyce never went back to Ireland, did he? And Patrick Kavanagh, he was a poet. He had a lot of his stuff. He was criticized, and they didn't like it, and they wanted to censor it. There's a famous poem he wrote called "The Great Hunger," which is not really about the hunger of the actual famine. This is about the hunger of the Irish peasant for love, basically for love and intimacy with another human being, and this is what gets suppressed. And there was this. These are three issues of the Bell. The Bell was, I think he was based in Cork, Sean O'Phelan. He set it up, and he tried to introduce more experimental and different non-conformist literature, usually in English, but some of it in Irish too. And a lot of these issues were suppressed, and stores refused to stock them, and the censor basically wouldn't allow them to print this, that, and the other. It was quite a repressive time. But however, Irish authors did get published, usually by going abroad. So Sean O'Casey, he went abroad. He went to actually live in England, and Flann O'Brien, although he stayed in Ireland. You either went into there's a saying about Irish artists, and in this period, you either went into external exile, like Joyce, for instance, or you went into internal exile, like Flann O'Brien. So he remained in Ireland, and he worked for the civil service there, but he basically drank himself to death in Ireland. So At Swim Two Birds is one of his novels. It's very experimental, very interesting, but it's also based on traditional Irish stuff. So I mean, there's a really interesting mix-up of very modernist, Joycean, if you like, things going on, and at the same time there's there's also a legend which it's based on, and characters from folklore appear in it. Then Samuel Beckett, of course, is better known as a playwright, but he was Irish. He's from Dublin. He was from Protestant background. He eventually worked his way across to England and then to France. He was in France, and he met James Joyce, became James Joyce's secretary for a while. and then he became very famous for his plays. You've probably heard of Waiting for Godot. That's probably the most famous one. Endgame being another one. These were all quite dark, existential. I will have to say although people think they're dreadfully depressing, they're actually very comedic in the much the same way as Flann O'Brien is very comedic. Very dark comedy, but still that is what you get most out of it. I mean, the absurdity of it. And Samuel Beckett, interestingly enough, he went to initially when he tried to be a teacher, he went to teach in a big public school. That means not a public school in most people's sense, but it means a private school in the English sense in Northern Ireland. And he went to teach there for a short period. And while he was there, he was told by the principal of the school, he was told to he said the principal said, in this school we have the cream of Ulster society. So Samuel Beckett, who is known for his dry put downs, he replied by saying, so you mean that they are that it's that they're rich and thick. so that was his response. Needless to say, he didn't last very long in that job. So we're now moving on to the 1950s. This is the last slide here now. We're just going to briefly deal with the 1950s. As I say, by the time of the 1940s and 50s in Ireland, it's the reactionary forces in both parts of Ireland have achieved what they want, and they've basically got everybody divided up on a sectarian basis as much as possible in the north, and in the south they've managed to stamp out anybody who thinks differently to the Catholic Church and to the very narrow nationalist view of sort of petty bourgeois Ireland or whatever it is. But this is sort of like a prelude for what's coming next. But the first stirrings of something beyond that occurs during the 1950s. This is the mid to late 1950s. There are two things going on. One is a struggle against a constitutional struggle against the partition of Ireland in general, and this is a stamp which was sent around to promote it. It was a constitutional campaign launched by the Nationalist Party, which is the minority party in the north, in conjunction with Fianna Fáil, which is the De Valera's government in the south, the De Valera part, the Fianna Fáil party, and they start a constitutional campaign to get rid of the border, but they don't give anybody any motivation for doing so. So the whole campaign really fizzles out quite quickly. But this is a stamp that they produced during this period. So as you can see, they're focusing on the sectarian divide. That's not going to help very much either. And while they're correct that the partition of Ireland is a crime against international justice, and it must be righted, etc., and the border's not doing anybody any good, really. It's framed in a sense that it makes it look as though it's sectarian, and it didn't catch on. It didn't catch on in either part of Ireland, partly because of its sort of middle class or nationalist orientation. On the right, we see some volunteers of the 1950s IRA. The 1950s IRA start to campaign using physical force to get rid of the border by that way. And that also collapses very quickly. I think it starts out in 1956, but by 1958, it's pretty much dead in the water. It sort of continues officially till about 1962. The IRA eventually concede at that point in 1962 that the wars that the campaign is at its end, but it's actually been ended by about 1958 in reality. And they set off a couple of bombs go off. There's not that many people killed. There's a few attacks on outlying police barracks, things like this. But and there's quite a few bad mistakes and errors made by the volunteers at the time. And so the whole thing, and what's even worse as far as a guerrilla movement is concerned, because guerrillas, as Mao famously said, the fish need the water. In the case of the 1950s campaign, they're basically the fish are flopping about on dry land and dying. So a lot of these people were arrested. They were either arrested in the south or they were arrested in the north. A few of them were killed in combat. But the whole thing dies a natural death. The only interesting thing about the campaign really is that a lot of the later people from the 1970s who were to have influence, like Daithí O'Connell and Seamus Costello, two people in particular, they were actually part of this campaign, and this is where they got their experience, and then of course much later on in the 1970s, then they become quite important figures within the IRA or within the IRA or its offshoots. Okay, so that's us finishing, and we hope to see you for the next episode, which will be about the 1960s and the civil rights movement and the disintegration of the civil rights movement into actual open warfare.